in a couple seconds. If you can take your seats. Thank you. All right.
I guess I'm up. Hello, I'm Paul Ha, the director of the MIT List Visual Arts Center, and I'm here to introduce our three distinguished guests. And our topic today is expanded or reconfigured spaces. And just out of curiosity, could I see a hand raise of those people who are in the process of doing something or just finished doing a project? Yeah, so it's a very, very topical topic for this group. And Boston right now is particularly equipped to talk about this discussion because the people here tonight, they've all gone through, have just opened, or is working with, or is building a new thing. So I think it'll be a wonderful discussion, and what I'm really looking forward is the individual presentation, but afterwards, the back and forth discussion, I think it'll be wonderful. And I hope all of you who's gone through or have done this ask lots of questions so we can all gather data and information and go back and forth. And the first speaker is going to be Elliot Bostwick Davis, and she is the John Moores Cabot Chair of the Arts of the Americas Department at the Museum of Fine Art, right here in this building. And as you know, they opened the beautiful modern contemporary Linden Wing, and I've so enjoyed visiting it and seeing all the different people using it, especially the school groups, and has a fantastic cafe, as you know. And James Labec, and he just opened the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and he joined them in 1998, and they've also just gone through this incredible renovation and rebuild, and I know you guys are going to be visiting it tomorrow, and they too have a particularly fantastic cafe as well. So something about museums and cafe that seems to be working. And Debbie Cow is the Richard L. Manshell Curator of Photography and is the acting head of the Division of Modern Art and Contemporary Art and Chief Curator at the Harvard Art Museum. And if you go visit them, they don't have a fabulous cafe yet, but it is housed in this cloth, and we're all very curious as to how it's going to go. So the format's going to go today is that Elliot will speak, and James, and then Debbie, and then we're all going to come back for a discussion. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Paul. Let's see, we'll get this up. In 2006, I think some of you were here when Boston hosted CAA, and we did a joint panel with AAMC. And at that panel, one of our discussants was none other than Joe Rischel. I haven't actually heard whether Joe's here today, but he said to me at the end, Elliot, be very careful. You have a tiger by the tail there. I hope you survive. So here we are, Joe. And I thought today, what could I help you with in terms of some observations of where we've traveled with many, many people at this museum and other museums. So in our 10 minutes of time looking at our clock, Paul, we will go through 10 things, at least I found, that helped us a great deal. One is begin with the end in mind, and what do we mean by that? These are views of where the galleries looked when I arrived at MFA Boston in January of 2001. Our gallery at the upper left there of colonial portraits, mostly Copley, Boston furniture, and Boston silver there at the lower right. We were a museum that was very much organized by medium, thanks to the building of our Evans Wing here on the Fenway in 1915, which was dedicated to paintings. But it's very important, I think, to develop your vision for where you feel these galleries are going to go, because if you can't do that, you really can't articulate it both with your team or with any of your donors. So imagine if you think of John Lennon or whatever helps you get there, and of course models and anything else you can have at your fingertips really, really helps, especially not only the team, but your donors a great deal. These are the actual galleries. You see the Revolutionary Boston Gallery, but we did have 4 sets of models at different scales, and I think some of you may have seen virtual renderings of these early on when we launched our campaign. And here's the end, thinking of the portal into the wing, and a great shot of Malcolm Rogers from the back opening the wing on the first Community Day, November 20th, 2010. Very important for all of us curators is define the curatorial role. This is surely going to evolve, and of course in the 10 years that we were doing this, it evolved a great deal for our team. But at every step of the way, I think it was really critical to make sure not only your own team knew what was going on and what was deliverable, but all the other teams you were working with. And I want to acknowledge all of the team of Art of the Americas right here. I'm not going to tell you who was photoshopped into that photo because it was hard to get us all together, but the 10 members, there are 2 members actually that are photoshopped in there, 10 members of Art of the Americas. But we had big teams that kept growing and shrinking depending on the job at hand. So we had members around the museum. We collaborated with the departments of prints, drawings, and photographs, textiles and fashion arts, and musical instruments, because Art of the Americas extends from 900 BC through 1955, painting, sculpture, and decorative art. So these other departments came online with us. We had designers, we had educators, we had people involved with universal design, and that was just within MFA, of course. Then beyond that, we had the architectural team, our director, Malcolm Rogers, there. Here's one of our meetings in the trailer. And I would also say, get to know your contractor well. Jim's going to talk, I think, about that. This is Bud Upton, who is our 4th general contractor on this project, and that's a constantly evolving, that was for us a role that changed several times, so one had to evolve and adapt with the general contractor, but important with each step to really define that curatorial role. Architects or artists. This is, I think, always important to bear in mind. We heard a number of presentations this morning about working with contemporary artists. I know a lot of you work with contemporary artists. The architects, and I like to think the curators are artists as well, because in many ways the arrangement of objects in these spaces is very much an art form as well as a science informed by many things. But I think when dealing with the architects and delivering messages to them, always a good idea to give them a sense of what you're hoping to achieve and let them try to achieve it, and keep reminding them what you're hoping to achieve, and then let them have the creativity and freedom. Interestingly, so here's our group, our core group. Here's Lord Foster in the center, Spencer DeGray, and Michael Jones, who was on our project the entire time. Spencer DeGray here, primarily the person we worked with Michael Jones. Lord Foster actually came to our team, or we met him in the courtyard when the courtyard was finished, so that tells you how that worked. And here's Keith Crippen with one of the key members of the people working with Michael Jones. He's discussing some finishes and details here, and this is John Small, who worked a lot with all of us on the curatorial team. Benchmark. This is really best practices, benchmark. It's like location, location, location. MFA started this early on in 1909. This is a little slide from a book called Museum Ideals by Benjamin Ives Gamel. I recommend it, Benjamin Ives Gilman. I recommend it highly to you. This is a man demonstrating how best to look at a posset cup in the bottom of a case, so he's bending down there. But we ended up going to many, many projects, a number of them with our case designer. This is Alessandro Gopian, shown here at the lower left, but all over the place. And here I would like to thank all of our colleagues, because so many of you really helped us learn specifically about your own projects, your own galleries. The important thing is write it down, and if you have an iPhone, take a slide of it, an image of it, so you can come back and share it with everybody. Here we are at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs at the upper left in Paris, and here's a similar kind of arrangement that ended up in our wing in the Design and Construction Gallery. Test, prototype, and refine. Now, we were very fortunate here at the MFA Boston that we had the wherewithal, the scale, and also the length of time in the project and the cost dedicated to do this. So we first began with 14 galleries that were reinstalled along here on the Evans Wing side, where the Art of Europe will be and is already. So this gallery at lower left that opened in April of 2003, it was called the Arts of the Colonial Americas, was really a prototype gallery, so we could try some things out. It was really like a laboratory. This is now the gallery where you'll find 18th century European paintings and decorative arts. They're a wonderful array of things. And here, some more of these framing devices with finishes, carpeting, and other things, testing it out. And here's Keith Crippen, again, our head designer, with Ingrid Sulkin, one of the members of Foster and Partners, looking at one of the 3 different cases prototype for the Liberty Bowl. So the one you see in the gallery now is our 3rd version. And that goes for even how you lay out the galleries, of course. We found out from our education department that visitors came to this existing building through the Huntington Avenue entrance and expected the whole history of art to unfold before them, which was kind of an interesting idea. I never thought people came to art museums and expected that. So they expected to go from sort of ancient Egypt all the way up through contemporary art. But it did inform for us this concept of layering the galleries, and there were some other considerations with height on the on level 3 of the wing. But like geology or layers of a cake, whatever works for you, the earliest collections in our care were on the foundation level, 18th century and early 19th century, on this layer from the courtyard, then 19th and 20th. So whenever you're on a floor, you have a broad sense of this broader art historical timeline. But then within each floor, the variety is very different of each gallery to gallery. Mine, history for ideas. This could be your own personal history. This could be places you love to visit or other kinds of ideas you get. These were spaces I knew as a child at the Shelburne Museum. I knew these well, and I always loved and was fascinated by how scale or massing of objects really transformed those historical spaces. These are historic buildings. But also the history of art museum display. We heard in the morning presentation about Frederick Kiesler's pavilion at the museum that James, we heard about. Here's Frederick Kiesler working in the Museum of Non-Objective Art. That informed our 40s, 50s gallery, but also the Salon Gallery. Here's a painting of MFA's own galleries at Copley Square, initially in 1870, late 1870s after we opened, and there's the Salon there on the right. This could be how 40s and 50s gallery from MoMA's installations of chairs on the wall. The Ames themselves, their cabinet inspired one of the displays in the 40s and 50s galleries, but the good design shows, I mean, there are lots of ways to go with this. Even dealers, I think, provide some great ideas. Here's Betty Parsons with the Pollocks. Here's Pollocks museum that was never built, but what he had worked on with Peter Blake at MoMA. And Edith Halpert's gallery with weather vanes installed a sculpture, again used here in this gallery for folk art. The building is about the art. I think that's the most key, that was the clearest message we could give the architects. And envisioning that, having spent 10 years at the Metropolitan, I always loved this building of the branch bank facade was not built really for the period rooms, but I always loved that central portal. And one of the people asked in one of the presentations, what was one of the most important decisions you felt you made? And of course, there were thousands we all made as a team, but I think having a central portal was critical. Because our architects really felt they wanted two ways into the wing, and the minute you have two, you really force people to choose one or the other. So the central portal, and I used, again, I think here the artists can always lead the way. This is Paul Clay's High Roads and By Roads, a painting that was at MoMA, and one I knew well. I had worked on Paul Clay, and so I felt he really expressed it in his this mixed media work, where you can go through the wing through the central spine galleries, or you can wander around anywhere along each of the floors in a variety of ways. Others have likened this to the branching approach of the internet, where you can open up a window. I think that's perfectly valid too, but just so you know, I think Paul Clay says it wonderfully also. But that's how we came to this shape where you have the central spine flanked by corner galleries with smaller galleries, and we had on two levels these north and south pavilions split by a 20-foot slot, and that was for earthquake mitigation. And for those of you who were in Boston in August, you'll know that we did have an earthquake here, and fortunately everything was fine in the wing. But just to give you a sense of this, this in yellow, this was an old slide, Foster and Partners, and they're thinking about their own functions of what this space needs to do. Our courtyard had to be able to seat 500 easily for dinner. And where we now have the Liberty Bowl, Paul Revere, Revolutionary Boston, this yellow represents the kitchen in this slide. And it's since moved. So just to give you a sense of everybody has their own mode of where the function lies, and of course it lies in the art. So these are the central spine galleries, Ancient Americas, those quiche urns greeting you, first floor, Paul Revere, and then here's the New Nation, second level up, you get the Boyts and Sargent, and then the top floor with this 21 feet, which was hard to work with. We ended up inserting those partitions. This is, I think, one of the books that really saved the process early on. It was Victoria Newhouse's book, Art and the Power of Placement. These slides all come from her book, but really makes the clear point that for 20th century art, those domestically scaled spaces really help this work, and particularly somebody like Pollock. Here he is with Peggy Guggenheim in her home where he designed this mural, the palazzo that she had in Venice. But here you see Pollock, the same painting in two different settings. We were dealing with this more or less on the right for the 21 feet on the third floor of the wing, and how are we going to really make that work within that. And we're about to reinstall that, so our Pollocks will now be in this one of the galleries to the south, so I think they'll be better served. Don't be afraid to start over. This lowest level, the LG, had a lot of issues going on with it as we tried to accommodate a lot of different cultural presentations there. In the end of the day, the indigenous peoples ended up in the spine, which I think was the right way to go. So you had Ancient Americas, two galleries, followed by Native American art, which comes right up to the present. And our ship model collection, which was always the one that was hard to situate in the wing, became that signifier for people of the colonization of the Americas. And I think Emily spoke so eloquently about the Atlantic basin, and so we used our ship model collection installed as though you were entering a ship's room in these collectors' homes, ranging from 19th century, late 19th century homes in Brookline, Mass., or this is Bill Koch's home on the Cape with these ship kinds of features and marine paintings. And I hope you had a chance to see the ship, the first yacht in America's room installed at the Peabody Essex when you were up there last night. That's what's here on the left. Make a silk purse, we're almost there, but this is where you're going to get all kinds of unusual things. This was a gift we received, a fireplace surround from two collectors. It was here on Commonwealth Avenue. Don't think it was terribly popular because it was really not really Asian, it was Asian loosely inspired, but we used to say I would say early Chinese restaurant. But it had these great kinds of ledges, and we thought these would make a great focal point. And at the time, I didn't know where it was going to be, but I knew it would make a great moment in the wing. Well, we were very fortunate. We were able to find this painting late in the game that fit it perfectly, the John Humphreys Johnson Domino Rose of 1897, and look what happened. When everything else gets in there, you're not so worried about how the fireplace surround looks. Be bold. I think this is where, you can't be really too subtle with your visitors. All of you are experts, and I know you know all the subtleties, but in a way, it's for the general public that you're trying to make a lot of these objects really special for them. This 49-foot beam in our Manning House frame was never popular with our British architects. What did it matter that we had a room from 17th century northern, Ipswich, Mass? Was that important? And they kept, the frame kept leaving the model and coming back. Well, it came back finally, and there it is. It was walked in, the building was built around it. Here's some of the wallpapering going in. This was quite controversial. This was actual wallpaper that survives today at Historic New England. It's got a 1737 stamp on the back. You can take a look at it yourself, and I think Keith Crippen did a great job finding us a good match. And be bold when it comes to asking your collectors for what you want. These objects were all placed carefully into the designs, as you can see, and it's really hard for those collectors to say no when they're in the designs. And then here, these were pilots with our education design and new media department for all of these behind-the-scenes galleries. And again, be bold in terms of thinking about the future. But most of all, remember, life goes on, keep your sense of humor, but most of all, enjoy your colleagues. There are going to be moments where it's going to get tough. Call any one of us. It looks like the hands out there. Many of you have been through it, you've survived it, and I think for all of us who walk into these buildings, we really appreciate all that you do. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now what do I do? I am not a curator. I don't give too many slide presentations. Perfect. Thank you. We asked a couple questions. How many people are curators actually in this group? I'm just curious. Oh, crap. I'm just kidding. Some of my best friends are curators. I think I'm the only non-curator on the panel, which is fine with me. You know, we started this process, and I want to respond to some of the things. It's so funny to listen to someone else talk about the process because so many things trigger funny moments. You know, you mentioned meeting Foster in the courtyard. We had sort of the opposite experience, and I know there's two Renzo people here today, but I remember sort of halfway through the project, I was likewise in a trailer in the basement or somewhere, and one of our security guys said, "Renzo's across the park staring at the site." And we went out there, and he was literally walking around in a trench coat. He didn't announce he was here, but he's probably here for the Harvard project. And he would come and sneak around and not tell anyone because he was observing things. And one time he came, and we said, "What were you doing out there?" He goes, I was looking for a color for the building, and I've decided on red," except he said ved. I was decided red because the fire trucks kept going by, he said. So, you know, a lot depends on who you're working with, actually, which is an interesting idea just generally about these projects. Another very funny thing, and I remember this early from the MFA project, which was walking over here and seeing the computer animated, welcome to the new MFA. And I remember we had a board member who asked Renzo for a computer animation of what it would be like in the building, and he laughed and he said, "That's shit," is what he, that was his eloquent description of it. He said, "It's nothing. A computer model is nothing. It's a fake world. You don't learn anything from it." So again, it's very useful for some architects. Board members love it. Renzo, let me know if you guys get a computer model. We never did. And you had a slide that said, "Don't be afraid to start over." Be very afraid to start over is my... It's not a good idea. We did it twice, I think, from a design perspective. And it makes for awkward moments going back to the city when you show them the plans. You know, they say, "What happened to the building covered with ivy?" No, that was a dumb idea. So, for just as a way of introduction, my name is Jim Labeck. I was the project director for our building project. I was Budge Upton. I've been at the Gardner for over a dozen years. I started right at the beginning of the planning process. I joke with the director that Ann Hawley and I are the only ones left, which is close to true other than some security guards. And I come to this talk with a manager's perspective. You know, as the project director, I think about this a few steps back. We had a planner who used to like to talk about 30,000 feet, viewing things from 30,000 feet, and I know as curators. What was that guy doing on his knees looking at?
Oh, the finishes and the label rails.
Yeah, so this is not like that. This is like, you know, jumbo jet level. Because board, budget, design, approvals, all that messy stuff is really my perspective. So I bring a little bit of different perspective, and I want to talk a little bit about a little humility when it comes to these projects, because I think not only my own experience, but what I saw in trying to manage our staff is that curators don't like to be curated. And that happens, it's true. Especially with someone like Renzo. It's what happens in this process, which is you're bringing in a designer to work with an entire institution, and some of these folks are very, very good at not only their craft of designing buildings, but very good at their craft of working with boards and staff. And I really feel that way pretty strongly about Piano's team. So I just want to go through generally, quickly, our project, talk about a few instances, and then I'll finish very quickly. It's going to be, I don't have 10, probably 3 points. And I'm going to finish with our gallery, because I know, despite the fact that I come with the whole project perspective, I know you're most interested probably in the gallery. So, you know, our project started like the MFAs long before we had an architect, long before we did anything. It started as a very humble sort of staff planning process or needs assessment after we had done climate control in the Gardening Museum. Does everybody know what the Gardening Museum is? Actually, I should have started there. Okay, so I'm kind of the micro brewer of this group, if you will. You know, it's a little boutique museum, not unlike a couple other in the country, the Soane in London. One of the many impetuses for the project was the idea that Gardner had made this permanent installation in a facility in 1903, and fast forward 100 years, and we have all kinds of challenges maintaining that collection, having 200,000 people through the doors every day. And then, particular relevance to our present director, to keep that permanent installation meaningful for visitors today, which means what is the programming around the museum and our capacity to engage with visitors in 2010, 2012. So we did have three main goals, and I think it was raised, the idea of always keep a focus on the end goal is a good one. We had a very good, solid planning process. I think that's important. We always referred back to goals like this. Everybody knew them. The curatorial staff was actually fantastic. The curator that was at the Gardner, Alan Chong, for most of the project, was very good at, and he was heavily involved in the staff planning process, was very good at that sort of keeping your eye on the prize idea. I'll just show you quickly. I think it is useful to see what some of our facilities used to look like. This tapestry room was used as an assembly space. It was a historic gallery. It was our one big room, if you will. And since the 20s and 30s, we had it set up as a lecture hall. So one of the goals around, or one of the main points around that idea of how do we best preserve the collection in the historic building was to get assembly out of the historic building, to get cooking in the restaurant out of the building, to get shipping and receiving out of the building, those kind of uses. This is a historic photo of the gallery. And I actually, you know, my perspective, I've said this 1,000 times, these two slides pretty much raised $100 million. This was the turning point for the board, when a lot of them had never known that this gallery was installed this way, but it was really one of the drivers for the board to say, this isn't necessarily about expansion. You know, from a marketing perspective, it's funny we never say expansion, it's an extension. And I think there's a lot of little nuances in there that are meaningful for people. Our project was never based on a business plan to bring in, you know, X number of visitors, X revenue, we all get bonuses. It was more about specific goals around, in this case, recapturing a gallery that had been lost. I just like this kid in this photo. It reminds me of my Catholic school days. From a programming perspective, we have a very good education program with schools in walking distance to the museum, multiple visits over multiple years, in-depth development of curriculum with those students. And they were being housed, or this program was being housed in a basement space that was used, doubled as storage. So, you know, these are typical, I think, ideas that pop up for institutions like ours when people start to say, you know, I wonder what, we probably have to solve some things. Here's my slide around humility, really. This was, we affectionately referred to this as the subway map during the planning process. I'm glad you can't read the fine print. It's not even important. This was program planning, physical plant, governance, operational planning, fundraising, these kind of streams. And the goal, which I still laugh about, the goal was to have all these things go through that sausage grinder and then hit the same point at the end, you know. And then this only got us to 2002. That represents the beginning of design. And the point that I want to make in this, and when you think about what happens after that, where we had a dozen regulatory agencies to go through, public approvals process to go through, fundraising to do, board involvement, donor involvement, you know, at some point the idea of, you know, what impact can anybody have on a project like this is sort of daunting. And I think when you start with one of these projects, it's great to start thinking about where can I have appropriate impact, right? I mean, I never want to do your job, believe me. No, there's nobody less qualified. But where can you have your most important and appropriate impact? And then when does that happen? And then how does that happen? Because I think the more you think about that, in a perspective like this, you know, when you think about, I joked about our building once was clad in ivy, which was a big point of debate, and then it went to this spooky green copper, pre-patinated. I would have friends, architect friends, board members, staff members, approval agencies, donors, you name it, saying, you know, here's what I think about the copper. And the truth is, if you want to know, I really don't care what you think about the copper. Because it's impossible to respond to any one opinion about something like that. I think the structure around any decision process in one of these projects is what carries the day. And at the Gardner, we're pretty small. There's 120 staff. And I think probably 50 of those are guards. But we still set up a structure so that all information goes through the director, so that we had a really solid client, architect,